Good morning, Steffi. It's nice to see you. Good morning, folks. David Severance here. Delighted to have you with us again this Wednesday, as we will be gathering here every Wednesday at this time. Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to those who are on the West Coast, especially at 6:30 in the morning. Thanks for getting up early. I see Anna and Michael are on the call from Florida. Great to see you guys here. All right, good morning, everyone. Let's get started. Delight to be back with you again. For those of you who don't know me, I'm David Severance, the leadership coach here at Chirag Shah Coaching. Chirag and I have worked together for many years, and when he started the business, he asked me to help him out with my leadership experience and background. So delighted to be here with everyone. We're going to continue our conversation from last week, and we're going to take it two important steps further. So before we get started, I just would like to ask you guys to put into the chat, the focus of our first 4 sessions here in this program is around performance management. As a leader, it's part of your role to manage the performance of the people that are underneath you. And many agents tell us that when they were independent, they were just managing themselves. It was quite simple and straightforward. But when they started having other people on the team, things get a lot more complex. You have people whose performance is not measuring up to your expectations or not measuring up to what the team needs to be successful. And so you add this element of having to get everybody to do the things that you need and want them to do in the right way. And sometimes they resist doing that, or sometimes they just don't know how to do that. So I want to start by asking you to put into the chat, what's your personal biggest challenge around this concept of managing performance? What's the most difficult aspect of that for you? Let's put some things into the chat there, and I'll address some of them as we go during today. What's the biggest challenge for you around managing the performance of people on your team? Motivating, micromanaging, starting the discussion, constant motivation, holding to account. Sure, that's a tough one, right? How many of you find it easy to hold people accountable? Not so easy, right? It's a bit of a challenge. Thinking I'm being too picky and don't want them to feel micromanaged. Certainly that's a consideration. People don't like to be micromanaged. But does everyone have the same definition of what micromanage is? No. Do you know how your people see that? Maybe, maybe not. If you don't, it's a piece of information that you really ought to be gathering from your team so you know where they are on that. You know, what's coming up a lot here, this concept of micromanaging, this idea of motivation. Isn't it kind of interesting to me that you have people on your team, but so many people are mentioning how difficult it is to keep them motivated? Can you imagine running a restaurant with a chef that wasn't motivated to be a chef? Can you imagine running an airline with pilots that are not motivated to be pilots? Can you imagine running a hair salon with hairdressers that are not motivated to be hairdressers? So just tell me, like, what's the reason these people aren't motivated? Why is there a need for you to motivate these people? If you have an insight into that, drop that into the chat. From my point of view, this does come up again and again with the agents that we talk with. You know, Chirag and I talk with so many agents every week, and we hear a collective, we get a collective idea of what it's like for everyone to experience leading the team. And one of the elements that come up here is this challenge around keeping people motivated in the right ways to do the right things. This isn't just a challenge in real estate, it's a challenge in every single business. Doesn't matter what business you're in, there are some people that are going to need some support to be motivated. But what does that really mean? If a person is not motivated, does it mean they're in the wrong business? Maybe. Does it mean that they have goals that are slightly different from the way that you perceive the goals? Yeah, very likely. In other words, there may be a misalignment between your intentions and their intentions. Is that fair to say? What it is you want to have the business doing, what it is you want to get out of the business, or you want everyone to get out of the business, might be different from what they want to get out of the business. If so, it represents a misalignment of goals or intentions or purpose, something like that. So let's talk about that a little bit as we go forward here today. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up the slides, And I'm going to review a couple of basic things from last week, just in case you forgot it, or just in case there's some people on the call this week that weren't able to make it last week. I see we have a bunch more people this year than last week. So we'll briefly recap that stuff, and then we're going to push it 2 steps further, 2 really important steps here that are part of the solution. I want you to understand that managing performance is not easy. People who run the Fortune 500 companies, and I've worked with some of them, they struggle with this too. People who've been in business leading people, teams of 100 people, 500 people, 1,000 people, and I've worked with them too, they struggle with this too. It's not easy. However, it's a crucial part of success in business. It doesn't matter whether you're coaching whether you're leading a business team, whether you're coaching a sports team. Anytime you assemble a group of people together, as we talked about last time, people have individual interests. They have the icebergs, right? We talked about icebergs, and we've talked about icebergs in the past, and the perception that we have of what is important to us versus what is important to another. And if those things don't fit, we're always going to have this challenge. We'll talk about some of these things further as we go forward in this process. So let me pull up the slides. We'll do a quick review, and then we're going to go 2 steps further. That's not it. Hold on. There it is. All right, so today we want to go a little further than last week. Last week we talked about a couple of basics. Today we want to begin talking about this idea of addressing substandard performance. We talked last time about a couple of things. Let me just introduce myself briefly, and then we'll move on to where we were last week and go forward from there. So for those of you who weren't with me last week, my name is David Severance. I'm the leadership coach here at Chirag Shah Coaching. Been here since the beginning. If you were with us in 2021, you saw my sessions on Thursday mornings for most of the year. These are some of the companies that I've coached with before and helped on leadership issues like the kinds of things that we'll be talking about. I've worked with many, many startups from around the world, many Fortune 500s, nonprofits, government, worked with thousands of different companies and individuals and teams to help them get the performance out of their teams that they look to have. In almost any business, we try to succeed through teams, but almost every team seems to suffer from a lack of achievement of the potential that's there. So the sessions that I'll be doing on Thursdays, they're for leaders of current teams, people thinking of forming a team, think they may have a team in the future. And certainly a lot of what we'll cover is really about how you bring yourself to your work, how you think. Everything in your business gets processed through your brain here, 3 pounds of gray matter. Everything that you perceive, everything that you interpret, and how you respond is always a function of what happens in here. And so a lot of what we talk about will be kind of psychological in nature. And that's why it's not just for team leaders in a sense, it's for how we bring ourselves to our work and our life. What will we cover during these sessions? Well, we've got about 6 months of time. We're going to cover these 6 areas during this period. We're going to focus on each one because each one plays a role in the effective leadership of your team. We're starting with managing performance because for many team leaders, that's the biggest headache. Many agents tell us the biggest problem they have is what you're talking about here, motivating people, making sure they understand what their role is, that kind of a thing. How to succeed in these sessions on Wednesdays? Well, this is probably true for Chirag's sessions as well. He said something like this, but especially I think it's important to remember these 3 things. 1, when you show up here, be present. Show up with an intention to provide some value for yourself. A small nugget that you can take away or a connection with another agent on the call sometimes is valuable. Make sure that you're here, because if you're not here when you're here, you're nowhere. 2nd, turn your monitor on. Why? It's not just because we want to see your face. It's because leadership is a relationship game. There is no leadership without relationship. And so if you want to learn how to be a better leader, you need to learn how to be a better relator. That includes showing your face. That includes speaking up. That includes contributing. And so just by turning your monitor on, you're practicing better leadership for yourself. And 3rd, have some courage to try what's not always easy, maybe something new to you, maybe something that doesn't quite make perfect sense to you. Have the courage to try anyway. Leaders always take prudent risk, and all of these calls at CSC are a great opportunity for you to practice taking prudent risk. The steps that we give you, the tools that we give you, they may not always be self-evident to you. They may not always be easy or comfortable in the beginning, but it's a safe place to learn, to practice, to move yourself a step forward in this great journey and adventure that we're all on, running our businesses and creating a life that aligns with our personal definition of success and fulfillment. Okay, so let's move on. Addressing substandard performance. A couple of quick review items from last week. If you remember, there's 3 things that are part of the managing performance of people. You need to be doing all 3 of these things: monitoring, assessing, and managing. Think of it as an acronym, MAM. Many of us are engaged in the 3rd part, but we really have no process or system for the 1st and 2nd part. First part involves, what are you paying attention to in terms of the people who work for you and with you? What are you actually observing? What kind of data are you tracking? What information are you assembling in your own mind or on paper so that you can understand what's really happening? That's what monitoring is all about. Most agents will monitor the GCI or the number of deals that their agents are doing, something like that, but that's about where it ends. And you know what? There's nothing wrong with that. That's good. GCI, or number of deals done, and comparing it to last year, that's all good stuff to monitor, but it's not enough from a leadership point of view. For example, it may have nothing to do with somebody who's an admin for you, or a transaction coordinator, or a marketing person, right? You can't really track GCI and say, well, this person's doing a great job. And how about how people get along with each other? How about whether they show up to the meetings that you call or not? How about whether they're covering all of the tasks and deliverables that you've assigned to them rather than just some of them? There's an awful lot of nuance in what someone is supposed to do for you and with you. The question is, what are you monitoring and tracking? So I suggested last week that you actually write down on a piece of paper what it is you believe the deliverables are for each person who works for you. You can create, in a sense, a simple job description for each person and say, I expect this person to be doing this, 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 and this. And then that becomes the simple framework for you to know what it is you need to monitor for that person. Assessing it then becomes the process of looking at what the data is saying and making sense of whether that means the person is on track or not on track. Are they above expectations for each of those deliverables? Are they at expectation, or are they below expectation? And finally, managing. Managing means where those people may be below expectation, what are you going to do about that? And we're going to talk a little bit about that today, and as we go forward, give you a couple more pieces as well. So you should have some kind of a system or process for doing all 3 of these things. Assessment, simply comparing your original intention, or what it is the person's supposed to be doing, to what the actual results are telling you. This is why you need some kind of a dashboard. You may have a dashboard for profitability for the business. You may have a dashboard for GCI for an individual person, but what else needs to be on your dashboard? Anything else that's important to you. If it's about updating the 15,000 names in your database and getting that stuff, all organized and tagged once and for all, that should have a dashboard item to it. If it's about turning around paperwork or some other elements of the process within a certain period of time, that maybe needs to be monitored and assessed, right? Whatever it is that's important to the success of your business probably ought to have a place somewhere in your monitoring and your assessment process. And yes, a dashboard could work perfectly well as Excel, for example. All you need to do is gather the information and put it on an Excel sheet, and you can track it. For example, you could say, deals done in January, deals done in February, deals done in March, or value, GCI of March, month. There's so many different ways you can do it, but it doesn't have to be complex. Chirag was talking yesterday about keeping it simple, and it is important. You don't have to have anything complex here. You don't have to think that performance management has to be a complex process for you. It can be as simple as knowing what you want to monitor, having a way of monitoring it, and therefore being able to assess it compared to your intentions. And then what do you do afterwards? We'll talk about that next. So your assessment grid could look something very simple like this. You've got all the things on the left that are the measurables or the deliverables, the things that you think that the person is responsible for delivering to the business or providing to the business. And so you go back to your job description or whatever your conversations were with the person when they started working with you, whatever it is that their role is supposed to provide. Now here, GCI obviously is a simple one, but other ones, keeping me informed, responsiveness, those are a little bit vague as examples, but it could be anything, right? It could be deals done It could be attendance at meetings. Like sometimes you have people who don't show up at meetings, but you want somebody to show up at every single meeting. So you can track that. It's easy to do, right? And so you list all the deliverables going down the left-hand column there, and then you just have 3 other columns, simply below, at, or above expectation. It's a grading system in a sense. And all you do is just put the check box. Just check the box in there that's most appropriate for that person. Or if you want to make it a little more complex, you could say slightly below expectation or greatly below expectation, right? And slightly above expectation, slightly or significantly above expectation. In that case, you would have 5 columns instead of 3. Doesn't really matter. Keep it simple. Keep it so it's easy enough for you to actually follow through with and do. So you've got your monitoring, which is what you want to be looking at. You have your assessment, which is how you value the delivery or performance on each of those items. And then there's the question of managing. So when you manage performance, you have 4 options here. 4 options: retrain, realign, reassign, or release. This is what we want to talk about today as one of these. Retrain. So when you look at a person's performance, there are generally 2 reasons why an individual will be at the substandard performance level or below expectation. The first case, the person doesn't have the skills or knowledge to perform that task adequately. That's a skills-based lack. Okay, maybe the person comes in, you're giving them a task they've never done before, they don't know how to do it. So what do you do in that case? Well, you have to train them appropriately in how to do it. Maybe you send them to Compass Academy. Maybe you have them shadow somebody else on your team who knows how to do that. Maybe you send them to some kind of a training somewhere else. If it's a matter of skills or knowledge, that's what retraining is all about. You need a new response or a different response so that they can acquire the skills and experience or knowledge necessary to complete that particular task. The second reason that someone may not be performing up to standards is the most common one. That's what we call a lack of alignment or a misalignment. That is, their understanding of what is supposed to be provided is different from your understanding of what's supposed to be provided. So for example, let's say that you talked with one of your staff, your admin, and you said, listen, I'd like you to update 100 people a day in our CRM. We've got 1,000 people in the CRM for the next 10 days. Your task is to update 100 of them each day, make sure all the contact information is correct, make sure they're tagged correctly. Okay, so that's the message that you gave them. Let's say after 3 days, you say, how's it going? And they say, well, I've got about 75 done so far. And you're thinking in your mind, wait a minute, we said 100 a day. This is the 3rd day. You should be completing 300 names by now, but you're only up to 75. What's going on? That's a matter of a misalignment of expectation. And we'll talk about how to deal with that in just a minute. That's actually the most common kind of problem here. When we work with teams, whether small, large, medium, doesn't really matter. By far, the greatest gap is in perception of what the task is. It's not usually about skills. Sometimes it is. If in both of those cases you were to make efforts to retrain the person or realign the expectations and performance intentions with that person, and neither of those work, then you have the opportunity to reassign somebody to somebody else, to some other task, because they're simply not capable and they're probably not likely to become capable of doing that. And so you need to reassign them somewhere else. And of course, worst case scenario is you release the person. If the person can't learn what it is you want them to learn, if you can't communicate in a way that you both have the same understanding of what it is they're there to produce, and if reassigning them to the other available roles doesn't result in a better performance level in those particular tasks, then yes, you should release the person because they're not a right fit for your team. So all this makes sense so far? So what we're going to talk about now is a second document I want to pull up, which is around this second point here called realigning. Let me pull this down for a minute, just talk about this for just a moment. So this gets into the topic that we call contracting conversations. And as a leader, this is one of the most important things that you can do. And it's one of the things that people most often do poorly. A contracting conversation is a conversation where 2 people agree on what they are going to contribute to a particular successful result. So for example, when you hire somebody, you have all kinds of conversations. I want you to come in and I want you to be a sales agent. I want you to be able to do this, 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 and this. And I want you to do it in this particular way. I want you to show houses this way, or I want you to, update the CRM this way, or I want you to communicate with somebody else on the team this way. All these things are part of the employment of that person. And if you have a good conversation there, then you have a good chance that those things will be followed through. But have you ever had the experience where you thought you explained something to somebody and you thought they got it and you found out later they didn't get it? If so, put yes in the chat box. Yeah, right. Pretty much everybody, right? And this isn't just in business, this is in life, right? Have you ever told your spouse, hey, can you clean up such and such before you go to work today? Or can you do such and such on the weekend around the house? Or you tell your kids, can you clean up your room or whatever? They didn't get the message, right? Either they got the message and they didn't care, or they didn't quite get the message that you thought that you were trying to deliver, right? This is a contracting conversation gone wrong. And anytime we're surprised later that something that we told somebody and some expectation that we thought we had created with somebody was not honored, we have to ask ourselves, what happened in that communication? Because we all know if communication is sent, if a message is sent, is that communication by itself? There's a second piece there, right? Whatever the communication is and however it's delivered has to be received on the other side, right? And it's always going to be received through the lens of that person's experience, their knowledge, their interests, their preferences, the state of your relationship with that individual. All these things may color how the person hears what it is you have to say. And so a good contracting conversation is one in which the message delivered is the message received. And when that happens, if the person is really trying hard and they have adequate skills, then you're going to have adequate performance in the end. But when we find that we have substandard performance, very often we can trace it back to a different understanding of what was expected here. And so that's what we want to talk about here. I'm going to share one document that we developed as a tool to help teams like you guys talk through a conversation like this to make sure that the message delivered is the one that is received. Let me pull this up. Okay. This is a role setting worksheet. This can be used in two ways. It can be used for you before you hire somebody to have a good conversation about that with that person about that job so that you're on the same page about what that job entails. It can also be used in a case like we're talking today, where a person's performance has been assessed to be really substandard, not just in a small way where you can just talk it over, but in a significant way. Sometimes we have people who are working for us that are not just falling a little bit short, they're falling severely short. And what do we do about that? Many of us are fearful to have that conversation because we don't want to create conflict. We don't want to have a confrontation. We're not really sure how to approach them about it. We might feel that they're worried that, we're micromanaging. There's a lot of reasons why we might not have that conversation. But the success of the business involves success of each person's role. And that means each person needs to provide what the team needs provided. And so you need to have good conversations about what that's all about. So this is a simple worksheet that you can use in that particular case to kind of reset the role or reset the understanding between you and that person about whatever the aspect of the business might be. So if you've been monitoring that person's performance and you assess it and you find that the person is significantly below your expectations, it's time to pull out this particular sheet. Yes, this sheet will be available with everything at Chirag Shah Coaching, everything that we do, all the recordings, all the deliverables, all the slide decks, all that stuff is available on the platform. And so we'll post it every day for those particular sessions, and you'll always have access to it. So using this tool is really quite simple. There's some instructions in the top, but basically there's some spaces here for you to fill in information that's applicable to your particular situation so that you can be clear in your own mind what the deliverables are, and you can use it as kind of a cheat sheet, if you like, for how you talk through this stuff with the people you hire or the people that you want to reset a role with. So first, for example, in the case of a new role, what's the name of the role? What are we calling this person's role? And okay, for example, we call this person a junior agent. If it's a new role, we have to ask ourselves, what is the case for having this role on the team? There's a mistake that I see many team leaders make where they just say, if I get more people, I'll make more money. But it's not that simple, as you all know, right? The more people you bring onto a team, the more complexity there is, right? A team is a system, and the more pieces you put into a system, the more complex it is. So you want to be really clear about why it is you're bringing somebody into the system in the first place. So a couple of important points for you to be absolutely clear about. If you're not absolutely clear about them, I guarantee you the person on the other side is not going to be clear. What are the general responsibility areas for this particular role? There might be 1, there might be 2, there might be 4, there might be 7, there might be 15. You need to understand what those general responsibility areas are. Then within that, deliverables. What are the specific deliverables for these particular areas of responsibility? What is it specifically that I'm expecting this person to do as part of his or her role on the team? And this is where you need to be really specific. I expect the person to do X open houses a week, or I expect the person to do role plays about lead gen, or I expect people to follow up and update the CRM, for example, right? Lots of things that may be part of your concept of the role that you may not have thought through. And if you haven't written down what you believe the role to be, you're almost guaranteed to be setting yourself up for a misalignment later on. I guarantee that if you try to just explain a job verbally to somebody, you will always be surprised later that they didn't get the message that you thought you delivered. And so this is a spot where you can write down, and there's not enough room on this particular form. We tried to keep it just to a couple of pages, but you understand the question here, and you should create a list of the exact contributions or deliverables that you expect that person to provide on a regular basis. What are some expectations? Well, expectations are not deliverables. Deliverables are the things that you expect the person to provide to contribute to the team. But expectations are kind of how the person brings himself or herself to the work. What other aspects of this team experience do I expect this person to perform? Maybe it's about using all of our current systems. And guess what? Some people don't necessarily want to do that. You want to find that out before you hire somebody, or if they're willing to, learn it and do it as part of their role. Maybe it's about showing up at certain meetings. Maybe it's about developing relationships with other people on your team. Maybe these things are important to you. They're part of your expectations, but they're not necessarily a deliverable for the role. Does that make sense? Work hours. How many of you discuss actual work hours with all of your staff before you hire them, or even after you've hired them? I'm wagering, based on all the agents that I talk with, not everybody does that. And so you expect somebody to be available at a certain time, and guess what? They're not. Well, that's the misalignment that we're talking about. So if you're not going to have a conversation at the beginning before you hire somebody and come to agreement on what those things are, including working hours, if that's important to you, then you're setting yourself up for a problem. Next, what information do I expect to be shared with me and how often? There's a lot of information that we need to share in a business. And these businesses work very closely together. You need good communication, information sharing. Doesn't always happen. This is your opportunity to get clear in your own mind ahead of time about what it is you want to know, when you want to know it, what form it's going to be delivered to you in, all of that stuff. So the question, Candace, the question about, an independent contractor agent, when to work, this is obviously a fraught kind of situation, right? These people aren't employees. Nonetheless, my personal feeling is that they're working with you as collaborators, right? And so it's the same thing with like Compass in some ways, right? We're all collaborating. Any kind of a franchise business where you have like, the central business, and then you have these other people who are independent operators, but everybody's working together. There is a little bit of a gray area there. And I don't mean to imply that you can require anybody to work certain hours as an independent contractor. What I am saying is you need to be in agreement about what those things are, right? I'm not saying you sign a contract, say you will work these hours. I'm saying you need to come to a point of alignment where you both have the same perception of what that expectation is. Because what we find, of course, is that we find that we don't have that same expectation until later on we realize the person's not even close to where we thought they were. So information sharing, very important. Next, how do I want to receive information? Do I prefer to get it by email? Do I prefer to get it by text? Do I prefer to get it in some other form? You got to have that conversation. And if it's somebody that you've worked with who hasn't been delivering it in the form that you like, you need to talk through how you can get to an agreement about what that is. This is why we call these contracting conversations. Whether it is you're hiring somebody for the first time or you've worked with somebody and you want to reset their role or at least part of how they do things, you're essentially diving into a new contracting conversation with that person. A couple more here. How much initiative or autonomy do you want to share with that particular person? What is it that you're willing to allow that person to take the lead on? What is it that you want the person to check back with you on? Right? Lots of questions. Yes, my suggestion is that you create this ahead of time and get clear in your own mind before you have a conversation with the individual. Then you have the conversation with the individual, you kind of share this conversation together and you write down what it is the agreements are. It's not a written contract, it's not enforceable by law, but it's about your opportunity to get clear and on the same page of your expectations. Making decisions. What kinds of processes do you use to make decisions on your team? How much input do you want from others? How much latitude does this person have to provide input on any particular decision? What kinds of decisions? There's stuff to think through here for you ahead of time. It's not just, hey, you did some good sales last year, you had some good GCI, you're hired. Right? You've got to go much further than that before you even seriously talk with this person about what the role is. And if it's resetting the person, it's about having the person have a different understanding of what their role is in decision making. Now, the second to last one here, training, development, feedback. This is one where you need to look at yourself and say, how is it that I am called to contribute to this relationship, right? Up to now, it's all about what's that person going to do for me? How's that person going to share information? How's that person going to help me make decisions? But you have an obligation to support that person. And this is your opportunity here to recognize how it is that I am going to need to support this person for success. And so you need to put down here the things that you think that person's going to need. If it's a new admin, for example, maybe you need to have that person shadow your current admin person for the first month. And maybe you need to help them work out a plan where the first week the person's going to be learning this, and the second week the person will be learning this, and the third week the person will be learning this. And maybe you need to dedicate 30 minutes each week for the first 4 weeks so that that person can ask you questions and you can see how they're doing and help guide that development, that learning and the handoff from the old admin to the new admin, for example. There's a lot that you have to do here. You can't simply think, I'll bring in somebody who did 100,000 in GCI last year and I'm going to get that for nothing. Right? Doesn't work that way, as you all know. And so you need to be honest with yourself and the other person about what it is you're going to provide. And finally, there's a piece here about boundaries. If you have boundaries, and most of us do, what are they? Is it a boundary about time? Is it a boundary about decision-making? Is it a boundary about how they relate with clients after the sale or how they relate with other people on the team? There may be certain things that you want them to do to stay in their lane. And if so, you need to communicate that to them as well. So that's the sheet. I know we're just about at time here, so I'll pull that down. So this sheet is designed to help all of you think through all of these important aspects of alignment before you have a conversation with anybody. And in the case of managing substandard performance, to be able to reset the role. And so if you can do this, then you're setting yourself up for success. And as you can realize, it's not just about business, right? Everywhere in our life, whenever we're working with anybody or living with anybody, these things come up all the time. And so if we find that we constantly have gaps with others about what we thought they were going to do and what they're actually doing, we need to actually look back at ourselves and say, how am I possibly contributing to this thing that's happening, right? It's not just enough to say, oh, they're not motivated or they don't care about the business as much as I do. That's a cheap answer. And, you can't just simply excuse yourself because ultimately it's up to you. It's up to you to make sure that the other understands the nature of the role and can help perform it according to the expectations that are clear to both of you. So thank you, everybody. I know we're a couple of minutes over, but we'll make this available to all of you. Put it into use. If you have any questions about it, we're happy to help you with this stuff. But the final point is, this is not easy. It's not something that's going to solve, your issues overnight. Learning to be really good as a leader means learning to be really good as a relator. And I know you're really good at relating with clients. You've been doing it successfully for years. But relating with colleagues requires some different kinds of things, and it requires growth and practice and application over time. So thank you all for being here this morning. I look forward to seeing you again next Wednesday when we're going to continue the conversation. Have a great day, everybody. Get out there and make the contribution that only you can.